Okay, everybody get out your Great Gatsby's. If you need one,
it's
they're
active, too
over
good.
here now. Yes, gotcha.
I've noticed there's a lot of car accidents.
Yeah, they're not very good at driving, are they?
Yeah.
Especially drunk driving. They're not great at that.
I never liked Daisy, and then I read that, and I was like,
So wait, is there a hidden rhetoric or argument that alcohol and drunk driving is negative?
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
What rhetorical strategies does he use throughout the book to emphasize this argument?
Exactly, repeated car accidents.
Oh wow! Can I just go to all?
All right, let me get your attention. Okay, so I want to start. We've got past a very important section of this book, kind of well, I don't want to give anything away, but a very important moment in this book happens when Myrtle is killed. Gatsby decides that he's going to try and cover up for Daisy. He says, "I'll tell him that it was me." And Nick looks in the window and sees that Daisy and Tom are reconciling maybe over this cold chicken dinner that they're like just like sort of sitting there drinking a beer and having chicken, after this essentially murder happens. I mean, it's an accident, but it's them just driving away and leaving her there is intentional. So I want to talk after reading all this. Oh yeah, and then we also get the part in the hotel room when Gatsby is demanding that Daisy has only ever loved him, So I want to figure out in this book whether or not Gatsby really loves Daisy and whether Daisy really loves Gatsby. And I think those are, obviously two different questions. But what do you think, Kaylee?
So I don't think that Gatsby loves Daisy. I think he has built up an idea of her that is increasingly further from the truth. And he maybe loved her at one point, but when they spent so many years apart, not only did she change from what he had previously saw of her, but he changed his idea of her, and the more time he spent apart and the more he did to try and earn that love, the more he built her up as this perfect figure in his head. Yeah. And then no person can see that. And Nick even says that when Gatsby and Daisy reunite for the first time, it's except for Daisy's voice, that's just only ethereal thing about her. The rest of it just can't measure up.
Yeah.
Even though she's, according to almost every character in there, she's a really awesome lady. But I think that Gatsby has gone beyond love, even with the idea of her. It's gone into obsession.
Okay.
Because he isn't really asking her opinion anymore. He isn't he wants her to be happy, but that comes second to her being what he wants.
Okay, so it's he wants. Oh man, that reminded me of a Fleetwood Mac quote. But it's basically he wants her to be happy, but he is more interested in being happy himself, right? I wonder if that sort of, in some ways, rhetoric that we use though, and we are kind of celebrating this aspect, if you are happy, then your partner can be happy, or work on yourself first. But I get what you're saying. It's he wants her happiness, but only insofar as she fits into this perception of who he thinks she is. And if she's not that, then does he really care about her happiness even? I don't know. Addie.
I think he's more obsessed with her. And I feel he was also, when they first fell in love and met, he was almost at a vulnerable point because of the war and stuff and everything that's going on. But I feel he fell in love ish, but more at the obsession.
Yeah.
And the wealth she represents.
Yeah, okay. So then we have two ideas. Is young love real love? in the way that like he was very young when this happened, it was 5 years ago, is she really like what he thought that she was? But also this idea of trauma too.
Yeah, and I just feel like it's like not really genuine. It's
Okay.
more of like, I don't know.
Well, you mentioned too that it's like, is it genuine love if a big part of that love is the wealth that she has? And if she's just wealthy, she can't help that. Could we ever then think of somebody being truly in love with her? You know, this is like, oh, the sad rich person, you know, but can that rich person ever really trust that somebody really loves them for them or loves them for their money, you know? Claire, you had your hand up for a long time.
I was gonna actually talk about Daisy on the other side, but
Oh.
I didn't know if we
Let's go there in a minute.
Okay.
Okay, Laura?
Okay, well, first to go with the wealth thing,
Yeah.
the line where Gatsby was like her talking is like money.
Yeah, her voice is full of money.
Because maybe he meant it in a way like, oh, it's like gold, it makes it's like maybe he meant it like that, but that just was like, whoa, I hadn't really thought of it up until that point, but maybe he was more in love with the fact that she had wealth, and then ever since then he's been trying to like fix his life because he feels like if he's with her that'll make his life the life that he wanted all through his life.
So it's more about he doesn't want to relive the past in terms of reliving it with Daisy. He wants to relive the past in terms of maybe I could always imagine myself wealthy. I'm not this new money. I can think about how this story of how my parents were money is actually true. And I get that through Daisy. Yeah, that quote is on 120. Her voice is full of money, he said suddenly. That was it. I'd never understood before. It was full of money. That was the inexhaustible charm that rose and fell in it, the jingle of it, the cymbal song of it, high in a white palace, the king's daughter, the golden girl. I think there's like some arrogance in the voice then, that it's like, you can say whatever you want to say because you're rich. But the way that he phrases that, it's like, is that what attracts them to her? Yeah. Josie?
It almost like when we were talking about like obsession too, I think like a modern day kind of idea, or like not like, obviously the same kind of thing, but it almost reminds me where you see people like, oh, like teenagers need to stop like obsessing over their like, you know, their favorite movie star, their favorite actor, their favorite singer, because you'll see too like, you know, like I'll see stuff where people are like, oh, like so many kids are like almost like not in love, but are completely obsessed with like certain like, you know, their their favorite celebrity or whatever. And I feel it's like kind of similar to Gatsby too, right? He has this idea of her, almost like how like a teenager have an idea of, you know, their like idol or whatever, and they're completely obsessed with them. And he's like, oh, she represents, you know, again the money and the wealth. She represents something to him that wasn't necessarily attainable, just right, like to us, like becoming this super big superstar isn't necessarily.
Yeah, that's interesting that the infatuation that we have with celebrities could partly be what we imagine them to be, but it could partly be wish fulfillment too. If I did have that knowledge of that celebrity, that would also mean that I'm on their level. I'm on their status level. I have their kind of money. So it's this fantasy of fame and wealth at the same time as it's a fantasy of like this building up who this person is. I was a big celebrity crush person. Honestly, I still have celebrity crushes. Are you, I mean, that's not true for everyone. If you're a big celebrity crush person though, where you like get infatuated with celebrities, you start to think about like that person is going to like me so much if only they had the chance, you know? When I was a really little kid, like 12, I loved Tom Cruise. He was like 40, so it was a real problem. And I remember going on my paper route and just dreaming about Tom Cruise and I hanging out. And I was 12, so I didn't like really get like what a crush is really supposed to be at that age. But I was sort of just like, oh yeah, we'd be such good friends. Like he would think I was so cool. And like, he would, you know, we'd have these great times. It's this fantasy though of like me being up to his level, like where it's like I'm an interesting person because this person likes me. All right, now we're getting all the celebrity crushes. You're not beating Tom Cruise. I'm just kidding. All right, Kaylee.
So I was thinking about what we were talking about with like her voice being money. Like I think that Daisy herself represents money, and that like Gatsby, what he really wants is this level of money, and he's been chasing after this like wealth and fortune his entire life, and she represents that. Like he would do anything for her. He'd lie for her. He'd commit crimes for her. And I think that the whole book is kind of talking about what people do for money. And like
Yeah.
Tom's relationship with her gives a different aspect of that. Like he's the one who kind of like took her for granted, and then as soon as he sees that he's gonna lose her, then he cares. And it's kind of like how a lot of rich people, they're like, oh yeah, money is not a big deal, and then they are in danger of losing, and they're like, oh frick, I care about that.
It's really interesting too the way that Wilson does that with Myrtle a little bit, even though they're on the lower socioeconomic status, like on the totally other side of that wealth, he still sees that he's about to lose Myrtle, and he's like, oh wait, no, she's my property. I'm gonna lock her up in this room and make sure she can't make choices for herself because she's mine. There's this way that it also becomes about possessing that thing. So if she is money, he would do anything to keep her because he wants to own that thing, money. And money in a way that's like more secure than his money, more like legitimate than his money, because he's a gangster, right? You guys are catching that, right? Like he's mobbed up. Yeah.
Along the same lines, I feel like he did love her at one point, but then he did go to war. He changed. But he's like, oh, you didn't marry me, like, because I was poor. So I think he also like sought after wealth because that's what he thought was the key to her love. But they've been so long apart, like they're still holding on to the idea of each other, and they hardly even talked. And it's kind of like,
At least that we've seen. I think we can kind of think that maybe
well, they
she.
talked some. It's not
Yeah.
like they've reconnected for 5 months, like.
Right. Good. And that's interesting because that will get us into talking about whether Daisy loves Gatsby, because does he really understand her? Is that really the reason that she didn't marry him? It's the reason he thinks. I think it's the reason that Nick thinks that she didn't marry him, but is that true? I'm going to go Zoe, Gracie, Addie, and then we'll go to the other side.
This
Yeah.
is kind of like off topic, it's still about like Gatsby, but when Tom saw that like the accident happened, he was like, oh, like it's an accident, like I'm intrigued, like you kind of like see something on the news, you're like, oh, it didn't happen to me, I'm sorry, that sucks, but like I'm fine. Or like you see an accident on the side of the road, you're like, I want to like check it out,
Yeah.
And he kind of, Tom goes into the accident with a bad idea, like it's fine, like it didn't happen to me, and then he realizes, oh, it's Myrtle. I think Gatsby kind of this happens with Daisy as well. He's like, oh, I can't have Daisy now, I'm like gonna do something about it in a sense.
Yeah.
I don't know, but like.
Yeah, that is really interesting because it's like we think of Tom as being like really careless in that moment, really kind of sick that he's like fascinated by this thing and only upset when it concerns him. But maybe that's a quality that they all have. That Gatsby is only concerned about Daisy's fidelity as far as it concerns him. Or yeah, I think you could take that further. Gracie.
Like going back to like if like young love is real love, I think that when you're younger, I think you're more in love with the idea of being in love with someone rather than like, I mean, sure, you probably care about the person a lot and you could say that you love them, but I feel like you don't really understand the concept of love until you're like more experienced with it.
Yeah. Then I wonder if that's Gatsby too, even though he's like, I think he's 33, they say, even though he's 33, maybe he got stuck in this kind of arrested development by always trying to go into the past. And he's just in love with the idea of love, but it's not true. And it seems like we're basing a lot of this on he doesn't really know her. He has an idea of her, and he doesn't have this kind of knowledge of her. I think that's what we're basing this on. Addie?
There's a quote that makes it hit one, and I feel like it says a lot about it. He says, "We talked a lot about the past, and I gathered he wanted to become an idea of himself."
Yeah. So it's like in love with his past self as well. Does anyone want to make the argument that he is actually in love with her? That all of this that we've been describing is components of love? Yeah, Claire?
So, I'm like a hopeless romantic in the sense of
Okay.
like, well, I feel like, I know the whole soulmate idea, but like everything he's ever done in his life is like, you can argue with one side, you can argue wealth, and I actually do agree more with the other side. But I do believe that there might be this like possibility that like Daisy was Gatsby's soulmate, and like that's why he did everything in his power to do everything and like engage with all these like bad things, all in hopes of just attracting her or throwing these parties, just all in hopes that one day she was walking and everything will go back.
Yeah, and if she is rich and getting the attention of the rich girl, or let me say it this way, if she's rich and being rich is a part of her and who her identity is, then maybe it's not so bad that he wants the wealth, because that's a sort of sign that he also wants what comes with the wealth, Daisy. I don't know. Maybe that's a messed up way of looking at it, but yeah, Kaylee.
I have kind of a rebuttal to that.
Okay.
So, saying that Gatsby is doing all of this because Daisy is a soulmate is kind of portraying a harmful relationship, like balance, because she's not doing anything for him. Like she didn't even do anything until he was rich, until he did all of this stuff. And yeah, they had a moment or something in the past, but she moved on. She did not care enough to have him be her soulmate.
So it could be maybe unrequited love, but do soulmates, they have to be for each other? Is that fair? I don't know. Claire?
So I'll like handle that again. I think like remember in the part where they were having a discussion and I think Nick or someone mentions Gatsby's name and this just like shock like goes over the body. She's like Gatsby, look Gatsby. And I think she is married and she's like in this cycle of like money and like his Tom and his notoriety and like his affair and all that craziness. And so she's in this, but I don't think she ever let go of Gatsby, but she didn't think of any way of being able to obtain him again. But I also don't think soulmates are a two-way street. I think like you said, they can be one way, and I don't know.
Yeah, I think one symbol I meant to point out to you last time that I didn't get a chance to is, remember when they're at Nick's house and it talks about them bumping up into this clock, and the clock hasn't been working for a long time, the clock is paused. It's maybe an obvious symbol. It's one symbol that people use to say like, maybe this book isn't as good as we think it is because it's too obvious. I disagree. I think it's amazing. There's this clock in this house that has been stopped, and this is where they can reconnect. And Daisy has had to deal with the fact that time has moved on, and because of who she is and what her position is with Tom, she's had to like follow through with time. She's had a kid. You can't just erase the past when you've had a kid. It would mean erasing that kid. I know the kid doesn't come up that much, but it does exist. So for her to like just pretend that none of it ever happened and I can go back to Gatsby or I can work towards getting Gatsby is completely unrealistic. But for Gatsby in that timeless moment, he actually can return to the past there, right? He can actually like freeze time and say we can be the same people we were back then and we can be in love. So yeah, I agree. I think that because of who Gatsby is, because of I'm kind of saying like because he's a man and hasn't gotten remarried, he's been able to work towards that life. Maybe Daisy doesn't have those same opportunities. Josie?
And slight rebuttal to the soulmate thing again, them meeting up or whatever, or even Daisy kind of liking it back. I think it's actually, and again, this could be kind of routine. It might be a little more trauma based than we think, right? Because again, we always right here we're talking about like he's in love with his past self, and they both want this idea of going back into the past, right? It could be, still like war trauma or whatever, but trauma is not just war based. Trauma can be a lot of different things. Maybe Daisy, living this whole life and in an unhappy life that could cause trauma because that's how trauma works. So maybe it is a little more trauma based. It's not necessarily rooted in love as much as we think it is, but a little more rooted in trauma that's happened.
So it's not rooted in love and making the other person happy, but maybe rooted in fixing each other, fixing the broken parts. I'm going to go to Elsa, Nat, and then Elle. Okay.
It just makes this whole conversation makes me think of the one scene where it's the day before Daisy's wedding, and she gets the note that I'm presuming is from Gatsby, and she's really upset about it and totally caves in on herself. But then the next day she picks herself up and goes about her business. Like
a couple hours later, she marries Tom.
Couple hours later, yeah. So I'm like, I think at one point she did love him, and that reminder was painful. Just like there are reminders like all that trigger, like all those feelings I had back then. But those are in the past, So I think that they did both love each other at one point, but she also loves Tom. She told Gatsby, like, I can't say even in private that I never loved Tom.
Yeah.
And so I think both sides can be right of this argument. Like, I don't really want to pick either.
Yeah.
I think they loved each other at one point, but I do think that she did move on.
She maybe moved on. She can't have this stagnant kind of love. Gatsby maybe can. Nat?
I think Gatsby does love Daisy. I just think what happened is like he had this idea from when he was like young and like just couldn't get it. Like he loved her, and then when he came back, it's like he kind of could when he actually met her and like re-met Daisy. Like, oh, I can't actually. It's like more obtainable, like something that he could end up with, and he still loves her, but like it just didn't work out. It's kind of a sad scenario where it's just like this could have really just worked. It's just the timing just didn't mix up because she's like she can't, but she still kind of has something there, but he's just like still so into it, like just can't ever get it because the timing just missed. He missed his window.
Right. And maybe the evidence that he's still so into it is actually what makes it not work, because he's demanding that she's never loved anyone else. That's where I lose a little sympathy for Gatsby, where he's like, no, you can only have loved me. And she says, no, but I loved him too. And that's what doesn't work for him. So maybe he's just like, he's too in love with her. He can't imagine that she sort of belongs to anybody else, or that she's had any other experiences with anybody else, because he's so idealistic about his love for her. Yes, Elle?
Yeah, I think to go on to Claire's thing, like, she can't really show her love for Gatsby anyway because she's not in a position. If she's married, and for one at a time, like, it's not, Gatsby's a man and he's not married, and it's not really thought that much of, but she couldn't do that. She couldn't sit there and wait for him. If he wasn't there, then she had to. She was with Tom, but also I think she's like in love with the idea of being in love a little bit, because she knows that he's cheating on her and she doesn't feel the same way for her she really does for Tom, but she can't do anything. They say that like towards the beginning that she can't get divorced. So when she thinks that maybe she can because there's another man in her life, maybe she's like, okay, I'm used to like him, maybe this will be better.
Yeah. So hers then becomes what she's willing to give up and not willing to give up, because technically there is divorce and she could legally divorce him, right? But she would have no rights. She would have, even by the 1920s, she probably wouldn't even get custody of her daughter. So it's like, you're going to lose, all this wealth that you've built up, this whole life that you've built up. And maybe that's what she's not willing to do. But then she meets Gatsby, right? And she sees all of his beautiful shirts. This is what I was looking for as you were talking on page 92. And he's mounting all these shirts higher and higher, and it's stripes and scrolls and plaids and all the colors, and she starts crying. And I think that's part of why she's crying, is it's sort of like, or what Nat was saying too, it's like there was this possibility of wealth I didn't even know. I could have waited, and if I would have waited, I still could have had this great life, but there was so much social pressure that led me towards Tom instead. Yeah, Austin, and then take
I think a lot of what their relationship is that they were both so in love with the idea of having a relationship. I feel like that's something that you see a lot in high school. Like young people.
Yeah,
everybody just wants to feel wanted in a way. And but I did say I want to get married.
Yeah, you did. Okay.
She's not.
But I actually think this kind of speaks a little bit to Claire's point about how it could actually be love. There's, these words: obsession, infatuation. Does he really want his own happiness, or is he looking out for his own? Is this real love, or is this some sort of like idea of love? But I kind of think that all of this stuff, like love, is so complicated. It all does kind of work together. Like, you think about why Nick loves Gatsby. I don't know what kind of love that is necessarily, but Nick does think Gatsby is wonderful, right? He thinks he's gorgeous. He uses that word. And one of the reasons he thinks that is because when Gatsby smiles at him, he sees his best self. He feels his best self. So it creates this idealized version of himself. So if Gatsby really does believe that Daisy is ideal, maybe that's like romanticism. Maybe that's like, I'm kind of playing devil's advocate here, but like maybe that's something that you want in love, somebody who does think you are the very best version of yourself. Yeah.
So I'm gonna try kind of like changed my point a little bit.
Okay.
But, like I still like stand by it, but like I think with Gatsby loving Daisy, like I don't doubt that he ever loved her, and I'll stand by that in any claim. But I think I feel like you see this a lot in breakups. So like when you break up with someone and then you only remember the good. And I feel like with Gatsby going off to war and Gatsby being alone, he only remembers this like pure happy state, and he thinks in his mind that it can last forever. Which that's where I believe he loved her, but I don't think that love would last forever. And that's what I was like, I wrote down, like talked about it, but like Gatsby just remembered this happy feeling that he felt, but he didn't like think about how it would be applied in his life now. And
He's being idealistic, but he's completely ignoring reality and practical concerns too. That time has to march on, and bad things have to happen, and you're going to have to learn how to deal with those things. And if your love can't withstand that, then maybe you're not actually in love anymore. Is that fair to say, based on your comment? Yeah, Addie?
so I agree with what you said, and I think this it's almost just like he has just like rose colored glasses on for Daisy that he's just not seeing all the good. And kind of like our homework when you ask like when Gatsby says like we can like repeat the past. I don't think he necessarily believes that. I think he just is living in the past and just wants all of those pieces to come back. And so he's holding on to this unrealistic hope.
He's a man in his 30s. I mean, he's having a bit of an early, but maybe life expectancy was lower back then. So maybe just a midlife crisis, where it's like you're thinking about how you're young and the world was in front of you and you had so much to achieve and your ambition meant so much, but time has gone on and you've achieved the things. And so the only thing to do then is to recreate that happiness back when you didn't have anything. It's this like real vicious cycle, Yeah, Audrey.
I think for Gatsby, Daisy's really like comfortable. It's just the idea to fall back on.
Yeah.
He's never had anything else. So why would he go out and push himself and like, try and talk to other people where it's just comfortable to fall back on Daisy? And I think kind of the opposite is true for her. Uncomfortable for her to think about not being mom, stability, life. Society just felt
Yeah.
so it's like this mix of their comfort levels are different. She wants to be comfortable with Gatsby.
It's so interesting to think about Gatsby seeing Daisy as like comforting, because the way he gets his money is so insecure, his actual money is so insecure, his like freedom is insecure because I guess you could be whacked at any minute, like this bootleg business that he's in, that's insecure, but Daisy could be this security. But for Daisy it's a little bit like slumming it. It's like, oh, there's something exciting over there, something a little bit dangerous, and I can get involved in that. So it's different levels of comfort. I like that. Lucy, and then Ted also.
This is like a different case. That's why I agree with it. But I feel like it could be argued, maybe, like Daisy like using Gatsby because she's like jealous of like Myrtle and like with Myrtle.
Yeah.
Like the side of the love thing, which maybe she loves him, maybe she didn't. Maybe she's just doing this all because she wants to like make Tom angry, which worked, and he was angry.
Yeah.
And then she ended up running back to Tom like, oh,
Right. Totally. I mean, she's gotten her heart broken by Tom being, an adulterer, and so you get to get some revenge this way. I don't think that's a crazy reading of it. Alistair?
Yeah, I feel like that kind of is because Mom already knew it. She went into the car with Gatsby all alone.
She's flaunting that affair. Yeah, Tom definitely knows, and there doesn't seem to be anything that he can do about it. And she seems to be very happy with that arrangement in some ways. Yeah, Lucy.
I feel
I'm coming
like
back to
it
you.
like worked out all along. She killed Myrtle. She's like, Tom.
Well, at the end of this chapter, Nick says, like somebody might think, Tom might think that Daisy did it on purpose, and to me that plants it in my head. I'm like, well, whoa, did she? I mean, I don't know. Is she capable of that? Elsa?
Well, also you just said the word, is it practical?
Yeah.
And it just made me think of, oh gosh, did I lose it?
Sorry, you waited so long.
Come back to me.
Okay, cool. We'll go to Kaylee and then back, and then we'll move on.
So I think the basic part of it is about attention. I think what she likes about Tom is how lovely about him is that the negative. She talks about how he like carries her so her shoes and get wet. And like he like does he did all these things for her, and I think that's what she loved about him, is that attention that she got from him, feeling loved and safe and secure with all the things that he did for her and all the things that he is. So I think that when she started to lose that, when there's this other woman in the picture, when she was like, now in this uncomfortable position of what if he leaves me, what if he doesn't care for me and my child, like, and especially I think the fact that she has a child and supposed to be marching, like I need that love, attention, and security back, and that's why she's so blatant about this affair. She doesn't hide it at all, and it's not even just Gatsby that she's like this with. Like, she also tells Nick, like, if you want to kiss me, I'm down.
Oh,
And,
yeah.
like,
Even though we're cousins.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think she's literally just trying to get Tom's attention back, and she knows that the reason that she lost it was because she was too attainable.
Ah, interesting.
So now she's being unfaithful to him so that he'll need to win her back, and through winning her back, she gets all of the things that she wants to get from him.
Yeah.
And I don't know if killing murder was on purpose necessarily, but I do think that it worked out well for her.
It does. I mean, at the end, if attention is what she wants, if Tom's attention and Tom's like utter attention, right? They're sitting across from each other at a table looking at each other. That's what she wanted. That is what she got through all of it, you know? Yeah, great point. Elsa.
I remember.
Okay, tell us.
So, did you say like this? Like, is it really practical? Like, all that is happening, like, it doesn't make sense to me, because when she like starts coming over a bunch, he dismisses all of his servants. But he loves the life that he had, like with all the people and constantly being. I think he feels so alone, like in his heart. Then it makes him feel better, like in his head. He's like, no, I'm never alone. There's always someone. They want me.
Yeah.
But he dismisses all the servants, and you cannot keep a house like that with no servants.
That's true.
Unless one person does it like 24/7, like it just doesn't make sense. And it's just that like that she has like that look of disapproval in her eye, and he completely does like a 100-degree turn, 180-degree turn, just goes complete opposite direction. And it just makes me sad for him, because like I want him to be his own person, but he's basing everything of himself off of her approval. And it was funny, my mom was telling me about this the other day, just kind of off topic, but like my dad was very smart and sought after guy, and girls will like always pander to him and like give him all the stuff he wanted. My mom like did not do that at all, and that's why he liked her, because she was an independent person, and they could be their own people and still help each other out with things and be partnership. I feel like it's really hard to love someone when your personality is so fluctuating.
This takes us back to our superficial artifice discussion.
Because like,
last
it's
time.
not really who you are if it's completely dependent on what someone else thinks.
Yeah. And if it is who you are, is there really any substance there too? Yeah. Okay. Really good discussion. I don't know. Maybe they're in lunch.
Have like a dartboard with all the photos.
Yes, like yarn connecting it all. Yeah. So you're gonna finish this book, not for Friday. I mean, you definitely can by Friday because it's exciting, but you're gonna do the prompt and we're gonna discuss it next Tuesday. So you're reading chapter 8 and 9, you're gonna see how the book ends. You're liking this, aren't you, Gatsby? It's good. No? Oh, you're discussing it like you like it. Okay.
I can have opinions on everything, trust me.
I love this book. The next chapter makes me weep. So be ready. You don't even know why. It could be happiness, it could be sadness, it could be fear. You don't know.
It's sadness. I can feel it in my heart.
Zach, You've been able to access Canvas now. Great.
Depends on the
You might want to do that, Luke.
I mean, night would be salvaging.
Oh, wait.
Oh my god. Just because some.
Oh, already?
I'm glad I was here.
Oh, okay. All right. So, I am gonna put, no, I'm not gonna do this because I'm lazy.
Yay.
Your notes for classical argument structure and Rogerian argument structure. If you want to glance at those really quickly, you could, but you know how it had these different parts to the argument, right? It wasn't structured like a 5-paragraph essay, but it was structured where it was, you know, first discuss the counter argument, then explain the problem, then explain your reasoning, and so on. There were these different ways to structure it. That can work for a general guideline for how to write your own papers. It can be a really good guideline, but it also is not always applicable. Like just those two structures are not always applicable for every single prompt. So today we're going to talk about how you can kind of use your thesis as a base for how to structure the paper. If you had me in 10th grade, I was obsessed with this, so we talked about it a lot. But if you haven't, this might be kind of a new way to do things for you. So let's just do the first prompt. Read the first prompt, the one that says educational psychologist, down to the number 1. I'll read it out loud, why not? So it says, educational psychologist Angela Lee Duckworth, that is such a good name, argues that intelligence and talent are overrated as determinants of long-term success, and that the most important predictor of achievement is a trait called grit, which she defines as perseverance and passion for long-term goals. This is why I chose this prompt for today. Here we are talking about Gatsby having a long-term goal and being very passionate about it. Duckworth further notes that the gritty individual approaches achievement as a marathon. His or her advantage is stamina. Write an essay that argues your position on the degree to which grit determines one's ability to achieve. So that was a prompt. I can't remember from what year. There's 2 thesis types, remember, that you can choose from. You're not ready, but we're practicing. So it's, we just had the plain enthymeme, which was the claim plus the reason. And then we had the counter argument with the enthymeme, where you acknowledge your audience's point of view. So think about your audience for this. Let's pretend, because it will be, it is the AP language graders, which are like, for the most part, like your parents' age. They're in their 40s, right? For the most part, like they're not all women, but like they skew. There's more women than men. They know about literature. They're all English teachers. So they're like, you know, the English teacher type. I know you think that that's a type. It is a type. Anyway, so they're that kind of audience, right? Decide in your thesis statement and how you frame your thesis if you think it would be better to do counter argument or just the plain enthymeme. And then I want you on the back of that, at the very top, to write a thesis statement for that prompt. And it's an individual one, write your own thesis.
Yesterday in family and marriage science, we were talking about surveys. And I was like, Dr. Borch isn't even a real doctor. He's not even over 33. And then they had to, no, they literally have to explain to me that people don't look old because they're over 40. And I didn't realize that. I was like, once you're 40, like you have like aspects of being old.
Oh, like 40 switches it?
Yeah.
Where it's like, one day you're 39, the next day you're 40, and suddenly
And
you're
you're
like wrinkled and haggard. I didn't get wrinkled. I don't have kids, so I look a little younger. Also, wait, I don't have any wrinkles.
And then. You're not in your 30s?
I am. I'm 37.
Okay.
That's so nice.
Oscar just like a fat
You know,
chick
Miss
right
Henry
there.
is 53. I thought she was like 36.
I have no idea.
She literally looks 36.
Wow.
Okay, but she still looks 36.
Oh, okay. So I'm gonna not take that to be fact. Okay. All right, regroup. So writing a thesis statement about grit at the top of the page. I gotta write one too. Okay. Okay, give everyone a chance to write a thesis. Quiet.
Who's got the hiccup? Oh, sorry. If you're done, double check your thesis statement. Make sure you've got a claim and a reason somewhere in there. Okay. If you're still working on it, that's fine. I want to show you mine. So I've said that while grit is an important element to success, too much grit can lead to perfectionism and anxiety, hindering long-term success. Now, I'm not taking my own version of grit for this because I think grit is talking about like your ability to cope. But in her definition, she says that it's perseverance and passion for long-term goals. So I'm going to clarify in my intro
that that's the definition that I'm using for this too. And I think too much passion for a long-term goal, like setting your sights 30 years in the future and doing everything to work towards that, it can be a good thing, but I'm saying maybe not for everybody, kind of an idea. And the reason I chose this thesis is partly because I want to stand out. I think that people will think about who their audience is, right? That if you're thinking about like, oh, it's Englishy teacher, AP teacher types, teachers are always talking about grit all the time, you know? And so I think they're going to say like, yes, this is essential for students to have. So I kind of want to be interesting by choosing something I don't think everyone's going to choose. That was kind of my motivation, but I also just sort of believe it. It's that gifted kid burnout type stuff. So when I am deciding how to structure this, I always write the thesis first, and then I go back and I write my intro. And in this intro, I'm going to use, I'll teach you about intros next time, but I'm going to use what's called a funnel intro, where I kind of define my terms and set up the topic. So I'm not using a hook. It's kind of just like, here's what grit is. Here's how it narrows down to my topic. Okay, so I've got that intro. I've got my thesis. Now I have to decide how I'm going to structure it. I like to outline. You don't have to outline to be successful. Different writers have different ways of doing it. But at the very least, I really like to know what order of ideas I'm going to attack. And the way that I do that is I break my thesis up into smaller parts. So when you word a thesis, if you're happy with the grammar of it, usually that means that you've presented it in a logical sort of series, and you've shown how there's a cause and effect series to the sentence. So the first part that I talk about here is my counter argument, and I acknowledge that that can lead to success. I talk about how it can lead to perfectionism, which is the second part. I talk about how it can lead, perfectionism can lead to anxiety, is basically what I'm saying, which is the third part. And ultimately, it hinders long-term success, which is the fourth part. So I've kind of broken it down so I know the parts of my essay. That doesn't mean that I'm going to have 4 body paragraphs, because one of these might take more paragraphs to prove than others, but it does mean I'm going to have at least 4 body paragraphs, because I've got these different 4 parts. So then I think about what each point kind of is. And I say, okay, grit helps success in some ways. Number 2, I'm going to say, but grit equals perfectionism. Just repeating these. Number 3, perfectionism leads to anxiety. Number 4, anxiety leads to less success. So I've kind of like broken up how it's a cause and effect in the logic of my thesis. Does it make sense so far? Okay, cool. From there, this is where I start to plug in examples, but I want to pause here because now you have thesis statements, and I want you to try to break it up like this and think about what your audience needs to hear first before they get to the second, third, fourth part. Okay, try and break it down that way.
So say your statement, like I did but I talk about
But it doesn't have to be yours. Let me take a look at yours.
okay, like I'm saying, is it okay to like your argument?
Yes. Okay. Yeah, you could totally flip that if it makes more sense to acknowledge their counter argument afterwards. Because if I talked about how, oh, this is perfectionism, then anxiety, but at the very end, I'm like, also, it's very good for you. It would leave my audience in the wrong place. But yours, it might be a good way to say, you know, we do not acknowledge some of your points, but ultimately.
If you want to read it, you can.
Well, it's like before my other. Maybe I was. But I can be good that way. You set it up already.
Yeah, and so now like you're ready to go like.
You make it on like.
She always got.
Okay, guys.
I like that. She's so good.
It's fine.
Don't do it, Gracie. You're my ride home. We're debating whether Gracie should just go to sleep. Fine, Gracie, go sleep.
It's like such an essential thing.
Got it. Oh, wow. Okay, and the times x power 2.
Okay, let's, I will come by and look at more in a second, but let's regroup for a second. Okay, how many of you guys have sort of a basic outline written down? You're not totally sure that it's the best one, but you've got one written down. Raise your hand. That's what I thought. How many of you guys have now a basic outline written down? You're not sure if it's the best it could be, but you do have one written down.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, good. So let's say you've got your outline now. You're thinking, yeah, this makes sense, the order that I've put it. And again, like I'm going around and looking at people's, but there's always different ways to shape this. There's not a correct answer. It's just what will work and what maybe will work less well, you know? For each of the points that I have written down, I need at least one piece of evidence to back it up. In these kind of argument essays, the biggest thing that's going to back it up is your powers of reasoning. You're going to be able to say, this is the way it should be for these reasons, you know, but they still want to see that you are applying the evidence from your experiences, your reading, and your observations to these points to make them stronger. So at least one per paragraph is a really good idea. All right, so I need some sort of example. I haven't even thought about these. I should have thought about them. Some sort of example about how grit, which they are defining again, perseverance and passion, helps you succeed. Okay, can you help me out here? What is an example of somebody's perseverance and passion helping them succeed in life? Yeah.
I just got a call from Lexi. She needs to be at.
I'm not on the Zoom call. It's a different thing. Tell her she just has to watch the recording. Sorry. Unless, did she already ask me about it?
Just not be sick.
Oh, there she is. No, she's there.
Oh.
I was on that Zoom call. Yeah, awesome. Okay, so Martin Luther King had like equality as a goal, zeroed in on that goal of equality, persevered through everything that was coming at him, and obviously like had much success, right? Okay, good. I'm okay. Good. And I think that we maybe even could use Letter from Birmingham Jail specifically, because he has that thing at the beginning where he says, seldom, if ever, do I ever stop to consider, you know, people's criticisms of my ideas. And I think that shows like with constant criticism all the time, he's still just like moving forward. So I'm going to use Birmingham Jail specifically. Yeah, Brennan?
Nelson Mandela.
And Mandela too. Oh, I've read his book, so that would be a good one. Because I know about, you know, all that time he spent in prison and so on. Okay, awesome. So now, even with those two examples of like the two most amazing men, now I've still got to prove it's not a good thing all the time. So I also want an example of when having too much passion and perseverance for a long-term goal leads to this idea of perfectionism. Can you think of any examples? I'm gonna just say, I think Gatsby is an example of this. I think he illustrates how he has this long-term goal that he's tried to make Daisy into this absolutely perfect thing, and it's not possible. Josie, what was your example?
Never mind, it's gonna be better for the third one.
Okay, save it.
I have a question. Are you allowed to use individual experiences on the argument?
Yeah, I was gonna use that for this one. me. So I'm gonna have an example here of, me from middle school.
Hashtag same.
Trying to do all the things at once. Okay, here's the trick. If you want to make things up about yourself to fit with the prompt, they're never gonna know. Yeah, you can't be so crazy and say,
This is like a Spanish test.
when my father Barack Obama or anything like that. But you can make stuff up. All right. Quiet. Let's regroup.
If I was ever an AP test reader, which I would never be, I would always
So-
try to guess if they're making stuff up.
So, yes, you can use personal experiences. We're going to talk about the best way to do that. It's similar to fictional experiences. It can be illustrative, but it can't prove it. You can't say just because I experienced this thing, that means it's going to be true for everyone. Okay.
With like grit equals perfectionism, I feel like on your Hamilton, because he was so passionate about history and his plans for things that he ended up ignoring his family.
Excellent. I love that. That's a great example of that. Kaylee?
Can you see an example for multiple things?
Yes.
Kind of oppose each other, because I was thinking about tonight, I'm saying that even though a lot of successful people have grit, like that's not the only two people. So could I give an example of someone who has grit and be like, oh, this is wonderful, have a conversation, and later at the end tie it into, but this is all the things that they couldn't achieve because of this.
Yes, I think that's a great thing to do. If you can do a callback like that, it works really well. Like, for example, if this was a different argument and I used MLK to say that grit helps success, but then I'm saying something about how you also have to have the support in your life, I'd say, but he wouldn't have been able to do it without Coretta Scott King, and so you can add to your examples that way. Any other examples for grit equals perfectionism that we could use? This is good. How about, perfectionism equals anxiety? Jesse?
Here's mine. I'm gonna say, because I was dancing my whole childhood and all that, ballerinas, like dancers in general, but especially ballerinas. You can get, obviously, even if you're professional, even more, I think, if you're like a professional ballerina, dance can be extremely hard, and generally ballet teachers are very strict with how perfect you have to be. And a lot of the times people will go into dance classes, just feeling very anxious, like, oh, am I gonna get in trouble today? Am I gonna do good today? Am I gonna fail today? And especially with the issue that, in ballet, that there's an issue with body image. Tons of ballet teachers are very just they think wrongly about body image. Like, oh, do I look good today? Did I lose enough weight? Did all this stuff, and that will lead to anxiety. So that's, I think, one of the
It's so good. It's really good. And what I like about it too is that maybe some of the best ballerinas are successful with their anxiety, right? But you don't have to discuss that in this paragraph. All you are discussing in this paragraph is that ballerinas are anxious because they're reaching for perfectionism. And if you have personal experience with that, you could tie that into what you're talking about with ballet too. Yeah. Yeah, Elsa.
For me, when it comes to art and drawing, I cannot do it often, because when I do, it has to be perfect. And that sometimes I have to on the exam, you don't have to be perfect, but a lot of the time it has to be. So it takes me way longer than other assignments. If it's an art thing, something, because it has to be perfect. But I think you have to understand, you have to not let it be perfect, but it'll still be good enough to still achieve your goals.
That's a great point.
Have nothing go wrong.
Yeah.
I have this one piano recital, and I totally messed up this one part of the song, but nobody knew. So it's okay to not be perfect as long as you have confidence and do your best.
Good. And for that reminded me that I I know about bookish things. And so I could think of, if I were not feeling so lazy right now, I could think of a sophomore novel, which is your second novel, that took somebody 10 years to write because their first novel got too much praise. And so they don't know how to follow that up. Okay, I gotta move on though. Anxiety equals less success. Oh, yeah.
It kind of works for this.
Okay, good.
Like another personal example, when you're running and you don't run a certain pace, or you don't run a certain amount of miles, then you feel like you aren't doing your best and you feel like you can't like do your best for like the next race, because if you like did worse, then you'll like feel like you'll have less success, and then you will have less success.
Oh,
You-
yeah, it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy
Yeah.
kind of thing. Yeah, good. Tell me.
Like, you like stressing before you like go.
Okay, good. So it's like about building confidence rather than building anxiety. That could add even like a fifth part to this where we talk about confidence, but I won't have time in 40 minutes to do that. Elsa?
This kind of goes along with 3 and 4, but book example or movie is the Dead Poets Society.
Good one. Yeah, that could be very illustrative of that concept. Is there anything else in like current events or history or pop culture of somebody who is anxious and achieves less success? Yeah. That's another fictional one though, right? Are there any like where we know of like some, I don't know, YouTuber or celebrity or whatever politician that has this kind of anxiety and leads to less success?
I
Yeah.
know what happened unfortunately at the Olympics, Simone Biles.
Yes. Oh, good one.
Right, everyone put so much pressure on her, and I think it really, like gave her so much.
Wait, what happened?
Yeah. She dropped out of the last Olympics because of mental health issues. She was like, I'm not going to be able to perform my best. Yeah, Austin.
With somebody who has anxiety and lots of stuff, I think it's the musical Zero Hansen.
Oh.
Because Evan is extremely anxious, and while he like really wanted to be able to tell the truth in the beginning, he ended up lying, and that just sent him into like this really downward spiral that just made it worse.
Excellent. Okay. Look at all these examples we have to choose from. Now, in a paper where we only have 40 minutes to write it, you probably just want to choose one per point that you have. Now, as I go around and look at people's structures, I want you to fill in the blanks on your structure now. Which examples could you use on your outline and try and plug them in? Give yourself like multiple options. Okay, Lexi, I am going to give you the prompt. I'm going to add you to the assignment for today. And I'm going to keep you added to that so that you can watch the beginning of the recording when we're done with class. But this way you can get the prompt that we're working with. It's all about grit.
Who's the person who said
You're added now.
you miss 100% of the shots you don't take?
That's been misquoted so many times. I thought it was Wayne Gretzky, but I'm not sure. Let me look. Michael Scott. It is Wayne Gretzky, the hockey player. Or it's Michael Scott quoting Wayne Gretzky.
What are we guessing?
Actually, what if you said if we wrote this?
What are we guessing?
Huh?
Actually, what if you said if we wrote this essay?
Yeah, well, it'll be like the last one. The next argument essay, you get to choose from the prompts that we do. So you potentially could, yeah.
Okay, cool.
The work for this Friday, I have not chosen what we're doing this Friday yet. So I can't yet, but I will when I get it chosen. Okay.
I feel like,
Okay, so you're plugging in examples to each point and keep plugging them in as
But you could.
How are you?
A perfect time with Harry Potter and how J.K. Rowling was rejected by a bunch of publishers before she actually Harry Potter. So it shows how without grit, Harry Potter would never be made.
Yeah. I don't know anything about authors.
What's it called?
I can talk about me.
I
wanna talk about mine.
Talk about number one. I love that song, Gracie. Cool.
Someone who lost their.
Someone
Like a famous person just be like,
Hi, Lexi. Yeah, she's here. What? What am I doing? I'm conducting triangular matter.
Do you know of any actors your age that
One, two, three. One, two, three. One, two, three, why are you asking me? She's the conductor. We're conducting. That. It's perfect. Yeah, like 1, 2, 3, 4.
you want to balance it? Like looking at mine, I think I'm gonna have to use Hamilton here so that I can balance it with some of the other stuff, you know, or Simone Biles.
Hi, Lexi.
I have my phone on
This is weird though. It's like having a one-sided conversation. Like,
I like
I don't know. It's kind of like eavesdropping. Kind of weird. Okay, Lexi, let me describe it. Describe what's happening right now, like bit by bit. So Luke, Claire, and Zach have just started conducting, like musically conducting, and now they're silencing everyone with the silent llama. Quiet coyote.
She said not eavesdropping if you know what it means. And she said you should just turn the camera around.
Okay, Dr. Bora. Dr. Bora. Dr. Bora. I have to ask Dr. Bora before I can turn the camera around. Illegal.
That's true.
But I was gonna ask Dr. Bora. Fine.
Yeah, I think it would make sense.
Hi. Why is your camera not on, Lexi?
Turn your camera on, Lexi.
I took that
dare you.
Shame, shame, double shame.
Oh, she said
We might have turned around your computer.
for Lexi.
Yeah,
That was Dr. Bora.
that's Dr. Bora.
Okay, I'm flipping her around.
No.
Hi, Lexi.
Okay, does anyone so far have any questions about this process? I think it's pretty straightforward. Here's where you got to be careful. So if you're doing it in this direction, you're not going to have issues with what I'm about to say. But if you start with the examples and work the other way, so if you start with the examples and then you think of your points and then you think of your thesis, it's okay to do it that way. That might be your process. But one thing you really need to be careful about is that you're not organizing the paper based on your examples. So it's not like grit is an important element to success because, you know, ballerinas have grit and Simone Biles has grit and Steve Jobs has grit. You're not listing your different examples. You're basing your essay on the logic and the examples are backing up the logic. Okay, makes sense.
Yes.
Awesome. Then we're going to do a bit of a speed round here at the end before we're done. Okay. If you don't have any more space on your paper, you might need another paper. Okay, flip it back around. There's a second prompt here. All right, let's look at the second prompt. It says, in a book published in 1999, psychologist Richard de Grandpré, what a nice name, asserts, when we ruminate about and plan things to come, when we study and work towards some anticipated eventuality, and when we imagine and harbor certain expectations about what the future could, should, or will be like, what we are often doing, albeit unintentionally, is redirecting our consciousness away from the present and into the future. When we do this, there is a tendency, again unintentional, of undervaluing our sense of the present. How does thinking about the future affect one's ability to experience and appreciate the present? Write an essay that argues your position on the extent to which anticipating and planning for the future affects our capacity to, as de Grandpré puts it earlier in the same chapter, appreciate the moment and ultimately live life as a whole. This is I tried to kind of find one that was a little bit the opposite of the grit one, you know, living in the moment versus having long-term goals. I'm going to set a timer for 7 minutes. We don't have 7 minutes. I'm going to set a timer for 6 minutes. And you're going to see how far in this process you can get. Thesis, outline, any examples you can think of in 6 minutes. All right, ready? Go. we're not. You're gonna keep it to work on the next argument essay. You got 30 seconds.
More seconds.
12 seconds.
10, 9, 10, 8,
6.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
All right, how far did you get?
Very far, actually.
Did you get to the outline? And you were trying to plug in a little?
Yeah, and I even decided to use. I
Good.
tried to make a thesis that not everyone would use.
Awesome.
Exactly.
All right, hang on to that. This is how the argument essays are gonna go. You're gonna get the one that I'm grading right now. You're gonna get that back. You're gonna absorb all those comments, and then you might choose one of these to write the next one about. So don't throw away the pink paper. You'll need it in the future. Oh, she's still here. You guys want to say goodbye to Lexi?
Bye, Lexi.
Bye.
They love you.
Our favorite.
All right, so I added you to that. It takes a minute for YouTube to upload the video. And so, in fact, I better stop recording.